So on August 18th of 2023, we were graced with the glorious presence of a video game called the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. As you all may know, that I used to cover this game on this channel. I was deemed very Mr. Negative about it, and, you know, in this video, we're going to be breaking down all the good and bad about the game. You know, it didn't really have a long lifespan. The game isn't dead. You know, people still play it. I still play it now and then to this day as well. It's a fun asym game, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of stuff that went wrong, of course, but the game itself, good interactive. The developers have abandoned it. They're not doing any more updates. So it's a shame, you know, that game's just gone. It's been swept under the carpet. You know, it's just there. They earned their money and they jumped ship, basically. And I did warn everybody with the updates and stuff as it was going on that this would happen. Nobody listened to me. They just said I was being negative for being negative sake to gain views on the channel and all that stuff, when I was really just, you know, sticking with my opinion and my belief. And I just always wanted to see the game succeed, because if you've noticed, my channel is like pretty much dead at this point. You know, every video that I put out barely gets many views these days. And why would I ever want to see these games that are making me successful die? You know, get that round your head, you know, into your brain. Why would I ever want to see them die? It's stupid. You know, I always want to see them reach their full potential, which is something Texas really did not do at all. So I have a list here. So I typed out a few things that came to mind about the good. I literally have two things, really. You know, we'll break that down. Obviously, it's vague, but, you know, we'll go into things, what is good about the game. And I have a much longer list of the bad and why the game ultimately failed, really. Could you call it a failure? I don't know. It had a lot of... It's still got a core audience there. It's still got a core player base. It's a failure in the eyes of the developers, I guess, from fucking off and leaving the game, basically. So let's start with the good, okay? Because it's going to be a short chapter of the video. So the first thing I have is gameplay, okay? Gameplay-wise, I think the game was very, very good. You know, I think it was really enjoyable. It had a really good gameplay loop. Having the means to escape in different ways was always so much more fun. Okay, you had car battery, you had generator. If you're on gas station, you had the secret door for a while before they patched that out of the game. You know, there was just so many. I mean, you know, you could still use a secret door. You know, they put some locks there, whatever. But, you know, they just made it unique in the way that there was way different ways to get out. You know, there's like 4 or 5 different escape methods depending on what map you were on. And that kept the gameplay loop fresh. You know, that's what kept the game going, despite some popular objectives like Valve in the early days was kind of the go-to means of escape, or, you know, even doing the fuse, but mainly Valve was one of the key ones to escape from. But, you know, you can't fault them there. They kept the replayability there. You know, they really brought something to the game that's not in other asym games, that is other ways to get out and other things to work on. I know Friday the 13th had that with a car, and you could phone the police, and you could get Tommy Jarvis there, mess up Jason. You know, I wasn't really around for Friday the 13th, so I can't comment on that in detail. But with Texas, I was around for that a long time. I played a lot of hours on that game, and there was just so much attached to it that made it fun and replayable, which was the part of the gameplay. And not only that, it was 3v4. I mean, the problem with Dead by Daylight, we have generators, we have hooks. You know, the most fun I have in Dead by Daylight now, as you see, is me playing 2v8 on stream. Definitely way more fun, way more enjoyable. You got more people there, you've got more, you know, you got an extra killer there. The killer isn't alone anymore. They're not feeling depressed being by themselves and playing Dead by Daylight, because, you know, being a lonely killer main out there on Dead by Daylight is a way for some mental problems, really. But, you know, kind of doing things together, you know, like they do on Killer Clowns, like they do on this game. Having those 3 killers there was really good, or 3 family members in this instance. It just made the game a lot more enjoyable, especially for me as someone who never really played Demon, someone who never really plays Killer on Dead by Daylight. You know, I just never really gravitate towards playing that, you know, quote-unquote power role. I much prefer playing Victim or Survivor or, you know, Human or whatever. You know, that's just what I enjoy playing these games. But, you know, people enjoy playing Killer. But Texas was the game that really kind of pushed me into playing Family a lot more, because I had people to play with then. You know, because I'm a streamer and I typically get people to play with me, I'm usually forced into playing that side in any way with the more characters. So that they having the ability there to kind of jump on and play the family side with other people was a really good thing. So, you know, like I said, I don't have a lot of good to talk about this game, but that was definitely one of the biggest things that drew me towards the game and what kept me playing it for so long. And then the next thing is the graphics. I think graphically it did look really good. Looks really nice. They really got the aesthetic feel of Texas in the game, and the movies, and you know, it just felt right. Apart from some of the weird stuff that came towards the end, like red filters, and yeah, I don't know about that. But when they started adding rain systems and, you know, the thunderstorms and everything like that, they really brought the game to life a lot more, despite them having a negative attitude about adding in weather systems to the game. Initially, when people were requesting it, Wes said, no, we don't want that. We don't want tornadoes blowing open the house, the front of the house, and all the victims running out. We don't, you know, should we really have it authentic where it's raining and there's mud puddles outside, and then if the victim's been outside in the mud puddles, are they going to trail that mud into the house and leave footprints around? Nobody was really asking for that much detail. Honestly, it's a video game. You know, you can be very vague about stuff like that. Just, you know, put it in there, make it look nice. We want it to look aesthetically pleasing. We want to feel like it's in a horror atmosphere. We don't want the minute details. Well, yes, you could give them props for attention to detail in that department of, you know, how far do we take these weather systems? It's not a necessity. It's not like it's going to put people off the game. You're putting people off the game by not putting it in there, if that makes sense. But, you know, graphically, it did look really good. Okay. It doesn't look as good as Evil Dead, in my opinion, because I think Evil Dead just had way better looks for the weather and graphically, you know, it's bigger maps and all that stuff. But, you know, it still looked like a really, really good game. Now, that's pretty much all the good I can think of. You know, some of the characters, again, you know, it's obvious stuff that they got right from the movie. The characters look right. You know, the victims don't look terrible. You know, again, it's just all kind of part of the graphics, but and that's about as good as the good gets. You know, that's about as far as the good gets, really. Now let's move on to the bad. So the first thing I have on the list here is irrelevant pay-to-win characters. Okay, this is what really started to annoy a lot of people when they put out their price list. Initially, they were like, it's going to be $10 per character. You know, $17 or $18, whatever it was, for that Nicotero Leatherface skin. But, you know, we'll get into the skins and cosmetics later on in the video. Just the irrelevant pay-to-win characters. Black Nancy, nobody's ever fucking heard of. Of course, there's some characters in the game like that. Like Sissy, Johnny, that, you know, kind of hinted to. There's little snippets of them in the TCM movies and stuff, but ultimately, nobody's ever heard of Nancy, okay? So there's this old woman with, like, a glass eye or whatever. And then we have Danny and the victim side as well, which... Danny really, really broke this game's balance, okay? You're talking about a guy that could leave exits open permanently, basically. And this is why we deem them as pay-to-win characters. I wouldn't say Nancy was ever pay-to-win. She was very underperforming. You know, she's putting down her traps and, you know, literally on wall gaps, but can be set off by other family members. You had the ability to see where victims were, but it was still very vague that you couldn't really tell where they were that well. And, you know, she's pretty slow. She didn't hit that hard. So she wasn't really a pay-to-win character. Danny, on the other hand, was massively pay-to-win. He really was. You paid $10 for a character that could really instantly unopen and tamper objectives, okay? And leave them open. You know, there's just... yeah, $10 for this. And then at the time when Nancy and Danny come out, $10 each. And then you had Chucky on Dead by Daylight releasing, and he was only $5. People are going to gravitate towards that. You know, a character somebody knows, and you only have to pay $5 for it. And meanwhile, they're putting $10 price tags on characters like Nancy, who nobody's ever fucking heard of. It's just baffling to me. And again, that's just one of the biggest bad moments of Texas that they could have possibly done, was had these pay-to-win characters, you know? Another pay-to-win character was Hans. Now, Hans came to the game. He looked like a really cool character. A lot of people intrigued with him. Again, attached with a $10 price tag. I know they did a bundle at some point where you got them, you paid for them both and you got them cheaper. I can't remember if that was to get Nancy and Danny at some point because they finally listened to people's feedback and bundled them together. But when Hans come out, I think you might got Hans and Anna as a bundle cheaper. Oh, not Anna, sorry, Maria. You might got Hans and Maria cheaper as a bundle, but it's you say it's a long time ago, but that was like, just over a year ago, really. And it does feel like a lifetime ago when Texas did come out and we were really all getting into it and trying to enjoy it. But that's irrelevant. And what is more relevant is, this guy being Hans. And then we all joke like the next character is going to be feet and the next character is going to be eyes. And Hans was, again, another pay-to-win character, really. He literally... So you had Danny, who could tamper exits, which did kind of call for a character like Hans to come into play, where he could rip stall those objectives. He could rip the fuse out. He could rip the valve out, doing stuff like that. He could instantly turn on the generator. He could instantly turn on the car battery. He can break pallets as well, because only Leatherface could break pallets initially. So they did a lot of cool stuff with Hans and made him sort of an overall good character. But again, it's an argument to say, is he pay to win because he can instantly turn off objectives, as well as Danny being able to instantly turn them on. You've got two characters on each side kind of cancelling each other out, kind of makes them, I wouldn't say them both pointless, because then it gives Hans the sort of dominance over Danny there, which makes Danny pointless, in which case that $10 character you paid for, if there was a Hans on the other team, you're kind of fucked and you're screwed. Not necessarily, but, your ability more or less becomes worthless, So that's the way I seen it with Hans. I think he was a character that was designed when we had Valve in the slaughterhouse basement. That's when that character would have made sense. And, this is what happens when we move on to pathetic balance and skill system changes that they did. So we had some really bad balance changes in this game. Opinion-based, I guess, if you want to say that I have right now. This is all opinion-based, but and it's a very strong belief in me that this game, apart from the choose fight meta that was going on with the grappling and stuff like that, I would say it was always family-sided. Always. And the main reason being is that we always, if you had a good Leatherface on your team, if he got those early kills, it made the game massively family-sided. You'd start the game off, just say, we're at the balance here. Maybe his victims appear a little bit at the start of the game. Okay. As soon as Leatherface gets maybe 1 or 2 kills in the basement, it goes like that. Like, that's how it worked in this game. Okay. That's why I always said it was more or less family-sided if you had a good Leatherface. If you didn't have a good Leatherface, however, that's when it was victim-sided and they bullied a lot of people, really. But I wouldn't say it really heavily relied on Leatherface getting those early kills to have the success. Because if he did have a good Leatherface, he broke all the barricades, he came upstairs, he patrolled around with everybody else. It made it very difficult for the victims to escape as well, because you had a character that could more or less one-shot somebody unless they had the perks to deal with them. So this is why I massively disagree with buffing Scout for family, okay? I played both sides for the longest time in this game, through all the buffs, through all the nerfs, and through the stupid grapple meta stuff. Even then, I took a little bit of a break, but I did deal with the grapple meta a little bit, and I was like, yeah, this is fucking stupid. But I did play it in the early days. I enjoyed the fucking chaos of it. Okay, the early days, the chaos, I mean, these games are always the most fun in the early days, but the first couple of months of this, before Danny come out, I think he came out in December, I want to say, or January. So we had like August to November or August to December without Danny in the game, and there was just so many ways to escape. There's ways to fight back against the family. I was mainly a victim main back then, and that was just what was fun. We had the Valve, we could fight around the Valve, the chaos of running around. Oh shit, I'm going to get one shot by Leatherface. Oh shit, I accidentally went into a grapple. I'm going to get insta-killed, because back then when you grappled, you could get insta-killed. you know, so the grappling meta wasn't really that big of a deal, and not really many people choose fight and stuff like that, because if you grappled and another family member would come along and hit you, you insta killed, you know. And as wild as that was way more fun than the game we ended up with, where when somebody's in a grapple, the other family member comes along and they're just hitting them constantly, like Cook's hitting them with his stick. They're not dying. You hit them like 4 or 5 times, they're still alive. It's such a weird thing. I think the reason this came to be, okay, the reason that method came to be with the grappling was so many people complained, and I was one of them. I found it very frustrating and annoying that when you did win a grapple and you got the prompt saying close encounter would, okay, the animation would still play. It would still play out, even though you've already won the grappling you've already won the grapple fight. The animation would keep playing, and that's when you'd usually die. That's usually when somebody else would come along, hit you, and insta-kill you. That's what used to annoy me the most. And all they had to do was just give them a little bit of an iframe. Like during that, leaving the one shot, but if they win the close encounter and the text pops up, they win the close encounter. As soon as that pops up, give them an iframe to get out of the grapple animation. That way, we wouldn't have had all these stupid metas coming into play, like choose fight and everything like that, because victims would still be able to be a bit more aggressive. However, at a massive risk of being potentially insta-killed in the grapple. So that's part of one of the big pathetic balance changes that happened in Texas Chain Saw Massacre. So they went to that grapple shift, and then on top of that, there was some good things they did with the balancing. Okay, they nerfed Taekwondo, the infinite door stunning, all that shit that was in the game. I personally never experienced that playing family, because majority of the time we were just insta-killing everybody in anyways, because I don't know, for some reason, not a lot of people are good at Texas Chain Saw Massacre. But that aside, they started buffing things up, like Scout. Okay, Scout was like the go-to, and it still is pretty much the go-to family perk in the game. And the way Scout used to work was you'd get the speed boost, however, you'd get a damage debuff. So you'd be moving faster, but you'd be hitting a lot less harder, basically. They removed the debuff, and that was the biggest mistake they could have possibly made, because, again, in my opinion, the game was already family-sided, but the way they timed the balance changes, it was sort of drastic to where, okay, we nerfing the grappling meta because family members can't do anything. That's fine. Nerf the grapple meta. However, we're going to nerf the grapple meta, but then we're going to buff up Scout, and then it's just going to go with the balance yet again. Is the term double-edged sword a thing here? They're kind of having they're doing a nerf on one side, but buffing the same thing on the other side to deal with it. So instead of going like that, you're going like that. Basically, you're dragging the balance out so much, so far apart, that it just makes one side become basically rat simulator. And this is why I stopped playing Victim. I really did, because as soon as they buffed up Scout and removed that damage buff, that's when Victim become very, very horrible to play. And it didn't really make it enjoyable as an experience. If you went back and watched the early days of Texas Chain Saw Massacre, how much chaos and how much fun we were having, stabbing family members, running around the valve, stabbing them again. Oh shit, I accidentally got in a grapple, I'm getting one shot, I'm insta-killed, but we still got the valve on. Like, it was just so much fun. They sucked that fun out of the game. They made Victim very stealthy. As soon as you were pretty much spotted by a Johnny or somebody like that, it was very hard to get away because they nerfed the stamina amount. They buffed up Scout, but they nerfed Choose Flight as well. So Choose Flight, I think, only refreshed your stamina 1 time now. Whereas before, it used to refresh it like 2 or 3 times. I think it was 3 times in total. When you're nerfing that, but you're buffing up a mobility on the other side, again, it's another big problem. And it's just terrible balance changes. It's pathetic balance changes. And then I'll take a breath, but and then we go on to the skill system, the skill trees. Oh god. So for those of you who don't know, there was this guy called Matt, who Matt Kocher, I'm gonna say his name is, I can't remember, but he used to do the TCM community streams, and he's the guy that said he came up with the skill trees in the game. So we have him to blame for how terrible the skill trees are, or were, and are now, I guess, as well. So originally, when you did the skill tree on a character, there'd be different paths that you could go in, right? And sometimes on these paths, you'd have a mystery perk that you could unlock. Not the greatest thing, really, okay? Because we didn't know what we were going to get. And there was only set mystery perks that you could get on that character as well. So going up the skill tree, getting the mystery perk, and if you didn't get that mystery perk that you wanted, guess what? You're respecking your skill tree again, and then you're going to roll it again and roll it again. It was basically having like a loot crate system, you know, doing rerolls of a skill tree to get the right perks that you wanted. And as soon as you had those right perks, you never touched your skill tree again. So you could sit there, you know, from 10 minutes to an hour, maybe it's even longer, just constantly rerolling the skill tree to get that right perk that you want, the right setup. You know, you'd get Scout. Oh, no, I didn't get Scout. I got, you know, stupid Blood Bucket or whatever. So that's how the skill trees used to work. And on top of the skill trees, okay, you then had attribute points. So you had all these perks in the game. I think the main culprits were Choose Fight, Choose Flight, Taekwondo, Scout, Big Swings. You know, there's a lot of the bigger perks in the game that everybody wanted, okay? So you had all these things that really give each side an advantage in its own way. And then on top of that, you had attribute points, okay? Now, so you had to make your build, you put 3 perks in your build, you level up your perks, you get some really crazy buffs there. And then you've got attribute points on how your character works. This is stamina, this is, you know, objective speed, proficiency, how quiet you are when you're gathering items, you know, in strength, how much you're fighting back, how fast you can kick off a generator. And you had all these attribute points to spend. Not great. Not really great when you're trying to balance a game when you got perks and you've got attribute points in there, because it's just going to make it a mess. And it did make it a mess. You know, there was a sweet spot as to where I think you put like 42, 44 in proficiency on Connie and then buffed up her stealth. You could instantly lockpick stuff really fast without making any noise and alerting the family members that you were there, basically. And then you attach that with her ability, which can instantly unlock objectives, and then the perks that go along with that, basically. So that's how the skill trees were working. Okay, and then they changed the skill tree system to then pigeonhole everybody into, like, basically they're going to control what build you can use. So with each character, you'd have more or less 3 or 4 different skill tree routes. However, only certain perks were obtainable now. You couldn't have the mystery perks, so every character had their set perk list in a specific skill tree and what loadouts you could create from that skill tree. So then you were very limited, you know? Some characters got some nice buffs from that skill tree change. However, it still wasn't great because most of the time you were left with some very, very terrible perks. And there was a lot of bad perks in this game. You know, I would say like 80%, 85%, maybe close to 90% of perks were useless in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They were very situational. They didn't give you much of a bonus or help in the situations or anything like that. So everybody always defaulted to running that meta skill tree with the meta attribute points, and that was it, really. There wasn't really much uniqueness there for what you could do. Unless you're on certain maps, and then you put stunt double on victim, where you could jump through windows, take less damage, etc. You know, there's just a lot of things like that, really. But you were just pigeonholed into the skill tree system that they redesigned, like, you know, halfway through the game's life cycle, and then just like called it a day, basically, and like, yay, now we control the meta. We control your loadouts. There wasn't really any wow factor there of making your own Texas build, really. Of course, there was ways you could... I would say, you know, they weren't really skill trees. They were play styles now. Whereas before, they were actual skill trees and gathering perks. Even though it wasn't perfect, obviously, we had to reroll constantly. But, you know, it was still just a terrible mess with the attribute points attached to it. It's just too much, and you're giving people too much to play with. You're giving 2 people to mess up the game with. When there's 3v4, there's 7 players. how does everything factor together? You know, how did all these attribute points stack up together? How do all these perks stack up together? How did they go up against each other? You know, it's so much balance and work that they really just kept digging their hole deeper and deeper with this game by doing stuff like that. And that is the one of many terrible updates that come with Texas Chain Saw Massacre. There's just so many terrible updates with this game. There really was. There was, you know, there was patches coming out. You know, they were like, oh, we've got over 200 bug fixes, but now, once that patch is out, nobody can load the game up on PlayStation, or nobody can load the game up on Xbox. That's what was happening. And the early days, because the game was on Xbox Game Pass on PC as well, Xbox Game Pass PC side of things didn't have anti-cheat, okay? So you can imagine how many fucking hackers were flooding the TCM crossplay servers on console as well. So they decided to do this really smart thing and remove PC from crossplay for, what was it, about 2 months or a month and a half? Like, PC crossplay was gone out of the player base pool, and that pissed off a lot of PC players. And, you know, you can't blame the PC people, because there's genuine PC players out there. You know, not everybody's a hacker that plays on PC. You know, people on Steam had the anti-cheat to deal with, but they couldn't play with the console players. It was literally the Xbox portion on PC that were hacking because there was no anti-cheat there. So it was a massive oversight from the developers, and then they kicked PC from crossplay. Didn't add it back until they did a really big update, and then by the time that went out, because you pretty much, you know, fucked off a 30 of your player base, nobody really came back to the game, because, you know, the queue times were really bad on PC. Despite there being, you know, quite a lot of players there, they couldn't really do much. You know, they were constantly playing against the same people all the time. They were stuck with the hackers as well, the people who were hacking on Xbox. So yeah, that was one of the many things that was happening in the early days of Texas Chain Saw Massacre, as to why they had, like, you know, I think I looked at the stat again the other day. It was something stupid, like they had 1.1 million purchases of the game, but like 3.3 million came from Xbox Game Pass. So in total, they had like 4.4 million players. I might be wrong with the stats there. It's very close though. But that's how it was. You know, not many people actually bought this game when it came out. You know, I think Wes said in an interview that they actually just made their money back instantly as soon as Xbox come calling with Game Pass, because, you know, they got that Xbox Game Pass bag, and that was it. You know, that was pretty much their money made back for the game. And then they had 1.1 million sales on top of that for the game. And then there you are. They've made a lot of money on Texas, not to mention the pay-to-win characters we mentioned earlier. We also have $17, $18 cosmetics, which is another thing we'll get into. But yeah, let's move on from that, from the terrible updates, because there was a lot of them. Majority of the time, they would break the game, okay? Now, lobby times. Oh, boy. Oh, okay, so originally you couldn't start a game without a Leatherface. Okay, Leatherface was always needed. And if nobody picked Leatherface, we were all just staring at this PNG background. By the way, that's another bad thing. The UI on the main menu and everything like that is so fucking bland and terrible. It doesn't belong, okay? It didn't really give you the vibe that you were playing Texas Chain Saw Massacre. What they should have done, as I always said, they should have had us inside the family house, in that living room area, the dining room area, having the family eating around the table or something like that while we're in the menu. Instead, we have this horrible PNG background of little gift birds flying in the background. And yeah, I mean, it's a nitpick. It's always been a nitpick of mine, but, you know, on a splash screen for games, sometimes you really want to be getting in that vibe of what game you're playing. Evil Dead did it right. Friday the 13th did it right. Ghostbusters did it right. Predator the Hunting Grounds did it right. You always had these really unique interactive feel to the menu and the lobby, and, you know, kind of give even the lobby time waiting a little bit of enjoyment because it was visually pleasing. This, however, was just fucking yellow stacked on red, and yeah, it's you can see it for yourself. It's not the greatest, honestly. So obviously we had these really bad lobby times, and the reason being, even Gunn didn't know what was going on with it, okay? Lobby's just not filling up. I I think you've probably seen Slash and Cast talk about this. A lot of people that covered Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the lobby times, they just didn't happen. They wouldn't happen. Like, we were just sitting there. It's like, just fill up. We need one more person. We're sitting there for 20 minutes waiting for one person to join, and it just wouldn't happen. There was just something bugged with, I don't know, lobbies merging, backfilling. I don't know. But this went on pretty much for the entire lifespan of the game. The lobbies were a fucking mess, and they were terrible. They really were literally the worst you'll ever experience. I played Dead by Daylight on Xbox before it had crossplay, so it was peer-to-peer. And as soon as you got a game, the killer left, and that would make you have to search for another game. It was probably on par, if not as bad, or like, if not worse than that was. Like, it was terrible. Unless you had, you know, a 3-stack of family, or a 4-stack of victim, even the 4-stack of victim, and you're waiting for that last family member to join. It was just painful. You couldn't play the game. So, lobby times, they're probably as bad, like, if not worse than the pay-to-win characters. You know, that would probably be up there as one of the worst things about this game. And right now, it's very hard to even get a game as victim. And even despite the game having a decent amount of players, it's very difficult to get a game as victim. So, if you do see me play Texas Chainsaw Massacre these days, it is usually on the family side. And now, another thing on the bad is Rush Week. Oh, God. So Rush Week is a separate game mode. It's basically 7v1, I think it is. How many? Was it 6v1? I can't remember. But it basically, you play as Johnny as the power role. You're invading or infiltrating a sorority house, and then you're killing sorority girls, basically. However, there was means to escape for the sorority girl side of things where you could instantly get the loft hatch ladder. You find the loft hatch cane thing, and then you find, like, it only had set locations, so you could find that instantly, and you could get out before Johnny could even break into the house, basically. So I think Rush Week had a good concept. It was set in the 80s. It had an 80s vibe to it. I think Rush Week could have been its own game. I just feel it was a waste of time. So you couldn't use any of the cosmetics or the characters at all from the main game, apart from Johnny. Johnny couldn't even use his leather jacket in the main mode, but he could use it in Rush Week. They definitely had a lot more fun cosmetics in Rush Week compared to what they did in the main game mode. It felt like Rush Week was there, and I always say it was there to really test the waters for their next ASIM game. And I think that's what they're going to be working towards, is making a game like Rush Week, where they're going to have the freedom of the cosmetics, what they can put into the game, the freedom to design and actually do their own skill trees and characters a lot more than being attached to a license. I think that could work probably for them in the future, and it would be something I would be willing to check out. But, you know, the execution in TCM at the time just felt like, what the fuck is the point in this? You know, you couldn't even play with your friends either. You had to queue up and hope that you got them. You couldn't invite people to your lobby and then search for a Rush Week game. In a multiplayer game, they said they didn't want people teaming up and working together or like bullying the killer. Why? It's a fucking PvP game, and it's an ASIM game at that. Of course I want to play with my friends and, you know, play against Johnny or whatever. It was stupid, okay? And as I said, it was just there, I guess, to test the waters out for the game, for their future project. I honestly can see their next game being something similar to Rush Week. I really can. Because, you know, Wes had a wet fever dream, as people laugh at that when I called it that. He had his delusional wet fever dream of a Giallo-inspired horror multiplayer mode, and that is what Rush Week is. But it's actually not really like Giallo inspired. But anyways, that's Rush Week. It was a mess. It had its moments, but it just felt, why? When your main game mode and lobby times and balance is suffering that much, is the solution to do another game mode? No, it really isn't. Okay, moving on to another bad thing, lack of an in-game store. So you could see what cosmetics you could buy, but, you know, I feel like a big thing in these ASIM games when they fail is that they don't have an actual in-game store. You look on Dead by Daylight, it has an in-game store. You can see all the cosmetics for each character. You've got a currency system there. You buy the currency, you buy the cosmetic that you like. This, however, relies on Xbox and PlayStation Store and Steam to actually have that DLC ready for purchase to download into the game. So, for example, like if the new Nicotero Leatherface skin come out, everybody wanted to try and buy it, but we couldn't buy it because it wasn't added to the Xbox Store. You know, that's why I always say I think in-game stores are so much easier, so much more important. Even if they cost the same amount of money, you know, it should be in there. I like having a browsable store to buy those cosmetics and stuff. And, you know, speaking of the cosmetics in this game, they were fucking shit, okay? You know, this video's going on for 35 minutes. I'm doing a big rant here, and I'm kind of out of breath talking about it all, but the cosmetics were fucking dog shit. And the cosmetics took so fucking long to come to the game because their excuse was they needed a good 60 days to make a cosmetic because they had to order magazines from eBay from the 70s era to make sure we get the denim and the fabric to look authentic in the game. And then we're dropping a $5 skin bundle of recolors. So we have we have the default skin obviously in the middle, and we have a bunch of recolors next to it. And we're like, oh yeah, that's $5 worth right there. It's not, because the cosmetics were so fucking plain. Okay, you look at that cosmetic by itself without the recolors, you'd probably pay like $1.50 for that, maybe even $1 because it looks that fucking bad, right? Look at this Julie July 4th outfit, for example, bikini outfit that she had. So it was literally like her in a bra and shorts or whatever, and you had the American flag. And guess what the recolors were? It was the American flag in different patterns. That was it. And it was $5, I think. Maybe it's even more. Who knows? I can't remember the exact price, but that's genuinely how much they would charge for their cosmetics. Apart from like a good few of them towards the end when they got a different team to do the cosmetics in the end, and they got cosmetics into the game a lot faster, and they made them they said they were adding a hair pack that never come to the game. There's cosmetics in the game to this day that you see in the game during like the Leatherface execution at the beginning that aren't actually there for purchase. There was an update once, and then all of a sudden Danny's got a new cosmetic that you can see. There was a lot of stuff like that basically that were surrounding the cosmetics that were just like, what the fuck are you doing? Really? Like, they didn't bring out a cosmetic that gave them accessories, changed their hairstyles or anything like that. They were just so fucking bland and the same sort of like washed out color palette that just like, oh, come on, man, what are you doing? The next thing we're going to talk about in the bad category is the arrogant communication. So during TCM's lifespan, we had several community check-ins, as they called them. So these were basically them addressing the concerns of the player base, talking about things that were upcoming to the game, like Shirtless Johnny when he got announced during one of these live streams and all this stuff. And the reason I'm saying this is a very arrogant communication is the way they would talk down to everybody, the way they were very condescending towards the player base as well. Like, people had genuine concerns about the game, like, why is this in the game for so long? You know, what's happening here? Why is the lobby system still fucked over? You know, are we ever going to see TCM2 content and all this stuff? And, you know, they always downplayed a lot of that stuff. Then, you know, somebody said, oh, don't you think you should apologize for, like, the way you handled this game when it first come out? And, you know, basically fucked off a lot of your player base, and a lot of people went back to Dead by Daylight, and, you know, you charged for $10 for pay-to-win characters. Well, you know, we don't need to apologize. I don't feel like we need to apologize. You know, it was just stuff like that. And even when the game ended, okay, they put out their whole statement of like, the game reached its full potential, we can't take it any further, yada yada yada. Didn't once thank the entire player base for its support over the years or anything like that. That's how arrogant they were. They didn't want to thank anybody. Okay, that's how there was just like such a disconnection between the devs and the player base. And, you know, it's you would say it's all political stuff. It's stuff that matters though in these types of games. Like with Dead by Daylight, you have the partners there, you have a community there, you have people coming together and actually wanting to participate in making the game better. despite behavior absolutely shitting on everything lately, as they always do with this game, but you know, the community's there and they're kind of put together, but it just wasn't there with Gun. They felt so distant. They felt like they didn't know what was happening in their own game. So when they were addressing the player base, they were like, oh, this is happening? Is it? We don't know. Why don't you know? Are you not gathering feedback? Are you not fucking listening to people? Are you not getting people on streams and having them collaborate together and talk and get through the problems of the game and making it better? None of this was happening. This is why the game fucking fumbled. And why they up and went, oh, yeah, we're gonna... the solution here is to change developers mid-cycle to a developer that fumbled Friday the 13th. But they're gonna do a good job with Texas. They didn't. Black Tower broke the game for so fucking long again and put some horrible bugs into it to the point where, again, it was just, you know, it reached its full potential, of course. And, you know, I always wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt where they were, like, trying their best. Okay, I really think that they genuinely did want this game to succeed. I think they genuinely wanted, like, they put so much passion and effort. They are horror fans. They are Texas fans as well. I really think they wanted it to do well, but they just didn't know how. And they didn't have the developer to do it. Because who made the game originally was Sumo Nottingham. And I think they made the game look great. Mechanically, it could have been better. You know, that's one of the things we'll talk about in a moment. But at the end of the day, right, you've got a racing car developer making a horror ASIM game, and then you move it to Black Tower. That's already I feel like moving it to Black Tower, maybe that was like the last ditch effort to salvage the game, but they just really couldn't do anything about it. And you know, sitting here thinking about it all, I just think it was Gun and Texas Chainsaw Massacre would still be going to this day. Gun are still going, but I think TCM and Gun hand in hand would be going, like, still to this day if Gun had its own in-house developer. I don't understand, you know, with the money they have, you know, aside from them taking the money from TCM and spending it on personal gyms in their house, I feel like they could have really got their own in-house developer and had a lot better communication, a lot more tight-knit and a lot more faster updates going out for the game, getting it in a good spot, and then branching out and making it so better and making it glorious, which is what it could have been. Instead, they went for another third-party developer, and, you know, the rest is history, as they say. And then, on top of that, you know, arrogant communications of the false promises that went along with this as well. We're going to increase the max level. We're going to increase, well, no, they're going to increase. They're going to increase the max level. But they didn't want to do it just to put a new number on the screen. They wanted us to actually unlock stuff in the game. Which, again, was another bad thing. We couldn't really unlock anything in this game. All we unlocked was, like, concept art and behind the scenes stuff, and that was it. You know, that's all we could unlock. We went from 0 to level 99 just to get skill points, and I'm still sitting there with like 145 skill points or whatever unused because I can't use them all. So getting to level 99 was a little bit pointless, really. You know, once you got there, like I said, all you got is a little bit more concept art, or you got like these little deluxe edition card things, or whatever it was. Okay, that, like, they just reused assets from stuff that they used to promote the game and dumped it in the game, and you unlock them with the levels. So this led to a false promise of them increasing their level cap, being able to earn cosmetics. Oh, I will say, actually, was it once you got a level 99, you got the blackout outfits? They added those to the game eventually. So you got like all black Cook, all black Leatherface. Well, I don't think they did all black Leatherface, did they? They said they didn't. It wouldn't fit Leatherface, from what I remember. I think you got a black Saw though. Yeah, I think with Leatherface you got the black Saw, but they just decided to up the level. I would say they were going to up the level cap. They were going to introduce in-game currency so you could earn currency, you could buy things with that, new executions, new weapon skins, all that stuff. No. So they promised all of that stuff and then went, no, we're not adding it. Like about 9 months later. They said it was too difficult to do. The gun's fault, developer's fault, who knows? But at the end of the day, false promises were there. It kept like this is what happened. Rush Week come out, they did a community check-in, and they were like, oh, Wes was like pleasantly surprised at how well received Rush Week was for some reason. He was like, oh, people actually like this. Well, if people like it, then we're gonna keep doing stuff for it. Oh, by the way, we're not increasing the level cap. We're not giving you in-game currency like we promised. It's too hard. We're not giving you TCM2 content because I can't get the rights to it. That's fine. You know, you can't blame them for that. You know, they just can't get the license for that stuff. Despite all the talks and stuff that they had. I mean, me personally, in my opinion, I feel like they could have got those licenses. They just didn't want to fork out the money for it. I think that was the case there. But anyways, that's a speculation. So we never got Chopped Up. We never got Stretch and characters like that we all really wanted to love and enjoy and see in Texas Chain Saw Massacre in the game. But it just never came to fruition, unfortunately. And again, that's when I left the game. As soon as I saw them go back on their word of increasing the level cap and the in-game currency, because I really wanted new stuff to grind for and things like that. And that to have that just instantly, you know, like having the rug pulled out from under your feet with that, I was just like, okay, I'm gone. That's it for me. I'm done. And then I think about 6 to 8 months later or whatever it was, the game finally met its demise, predictably from my point of view. But moving on to the last thing, because I'm wrapping this up, it's nearly an hour. I didn't realize it would go on for so long, but I did. I feel like I've gone into a lot of detail here, okay? If anybody who's anybody doesn't know what happened to Texas Chain Saw Massacre, now you do, okay? Now you do. Everybody knows what happened to this shit show of a game. And I've literally spelt it all out from you. And, you know, I'm not making any of this up, by the way. This is exactly what happened from the scheduling, from launch up until the game's demise, pretty much. This is what was going on in between. It's just find it funny how ignorant or arrogant, whatever you want to say, they were to the player feedback. Not listening at all. Really not listening. Like I said, the arrogant communication when people were asking for weather systems and more executions and things like that, more gore added to the game and things. They were just like playing it down like, no, we don't need to do that. It's too difficult to do that. It's not authentic enough to do that. It's just not a way to run the game, really. But yeah, the last thing I want to say that is bad about this game was the janky mechanics. Okay, it's not a big thing that was really bad, but it's one of those things that comes with every single asym game in existence, pretty much, is when you spend enough time playing the game, okay, you get used to all of this and you don't notice it anymore. But it's things like when you're doing a Jedi force pull and grabbing a fucking health bottle from like 10 yards away by pressing the button. You're turning the valve on and you're still turning the valve on while you're running away. You know, it's just a lot of the janky mechanics that didn't make the game have a smooth process, especially with doors. Doors slamming and stuff like that. The doors not opening and closing properly. All of that was a big problem in the game too. So it didn't really have that polish. I feel like the game just needed that an extra maybe 4 to 6 months before it come out, just to like polish all the gameplay up, make it a lot smoother, a lot more predictable. Unless you're spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours playing this game to get used to like those little frame, that specific frame you need to be in to hit that or to grab that item or to look away from that item so you can actually close the door and stuff like that, you know? Like there's so many times where I've ran through a doorway and I went to slam the door behind me, but instead I've grabbed like Jedi, you know, force pull a fucking health bottle close to me, or I start grabbing hold of a valve or a fuse and I'm stuck in that animation. I get fucking one shot in the back. You know, there's just so many times that's happened, is what I mean to janky mechanics. But the more you play, the more you get used to that, and the more you understand what each frame is. But you shouldn't have to, really, and that's just what really plays down the janky mechanic route, really, and that's how the games go. But I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video for the good and the bad of Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Overall, through the lifespan of the game, you know, should I rate it? I think I would say it'd probably worth about a 7, I would say, out of 10. Despite all the bad that I went through, I think the gameplay and the graphics almost outweigh all the bad in this game, just because of how good it was in terms of its you know, mechanics and the replayability there, and just how fun you can have with the characters and playing with friends on the family side and stuff like that. It's just, it was a blast when it was popular. I wish the game would come back. I would, you know, as much as I fucking hate Gun right now for what happened with that game and all that stuff, I'd still love to see the game come back somehow, you know, and they, in a way that, you know, they start doing my kind of things in the game that I would enjoy. Not that they would, but, you know, like things like battle passes, things to grind for, things to play for, because, you know, so many people sit in the comments when I used to cover this game and be like, what happened to just playing games for fun? Well, yeah, that's very sad and depressing, but, you know, we're in 2025, 2024, and 2023 here, when the game was going and getting updates, and, you know, we're getting in the traditional DLC route of paying $10 for a character that's pay to win. I know what I'd rather have. I'd rather have a battle pass that I can sit and fucking grind for. I think that's one of the most important things, really, in these games. And I'm not saying, you know, we need a battle pass all the time, and we need to spend money on this game to have fun. You know, there should be battle passes. There should be free things to grind for as well. You know, there needs to be a good balance there, and this game just didn't have it. And so many people just left the game because there just wasn't much to do in it other than play a few games and get off. And that's sadly what I've game. But yeah, like I said, it's a shame. I wish the game had gone on longer. I wish it had better decision making behind the scenes, but it's really their own fault for not listening to our feedback. But I do appreciate you all listening and watching this video fucking podcast, whatever the hell this is, because it went on for so long. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button, please. Leave me a like, hit that comment section. Let me know all your thoughts, what I've talked about in this video as well. Do you still play Texas? Let me know down below. I still play it from time to time. I streamed it the other day. And by the way, I do stream on this channel. Right now, I don't know what I'm doing in the future, but what I do know is I'm always going to be sticking doing this horror content and talking about horror games and having fun with everybody here. So if you want to be around here and you enjoy my personality, hit that subscribe button. And I have been Pixels, my awesome viewers. I'll catch you guys in the next one.